a rebel. He was on a fool's errand the Emperor's daughter had sent him on. The rebels were preparing a last-ditch attack against...
Put out? I owe you better than that.
I know how you feel about me, love. You want to join up with me, don't you? You got to admit, we'd make a great team. Of all the arrogant, ham-handed, half-assed, half-witted... Oh, come on.
My power's too strong. Zenobia? Where was she?
When he awoke, he was staring up at the sky. Zenobia looked down at him, frowning.
I probably ought to kill you, but that'd be a bit tawdry, wouldn't it? She was tossing the glowing stone from paw to paw. This is pretty.
Zenobia!
He shouted, and then he fell back into sleep. On the Farfarer, Renato drank his favorite headache remedy. But it did no good. Zenobia had beaten him again. Oh, he really should have listened to the Iblastone in the first place instead of messing around with the core. He had a bad feeling about the upcoming fight, but what kind of hero misses the final battle?
Renato was bruised and tired. He wasn't looking forward to killing ravens. Iblastone. That should terrify him, shouldn't it? But he just felt dull and stupid as he carved his way towards the property. It was all so unfair. He'd wanted to protect himself, protect the world from the Iblastone's hunger for blood and souls. And all he'd done is get mugged. Next time he owned a supernatural artifact that wanted tribute, he'd serve it champagne and caviar. Zenobia was off her sword and weeping. It's so hungry. I can't stop killing, she said. But I fed it the core of the Sky Ripper, and now it's hungry again. She wept. It was true. The Iblastone was black again, a void that seemed to suck all the light out of the sky. Take it from me, Renato. While you still can. Okay. I'll take it, he said.
Yes, he thought. This is what it means to be a hero. To save the soul of even his old enemy when it looked like all was lost. He stepped forward to accept the sword from her outstretched hand. She flipped the sword, and the blade went into his gut. As the Iblis stone sucked his soul into its infinite darkness, he could vaguely hear a voice, something like Zenobia's chuckle. Sucker. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Bernardo knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong. But he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Bernardo had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion, and he had a gut feeling that he needed to use that to his advantage. Renato finally realized that Lapino was a traitor to the cause, and maybe Renato could use that somehow. Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen a winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait, where was the prison? The village was empty. Had everybody fled the ravens? That was odd. Bernardo had been here, at this exact place, at this exact time. But this time, there were so many more ravens. Bernardo looked around the empty village and reflected. The Sky Ripper had turned out to be far too dangerous to be used. Time to turn to what he knew best. Lapino would betray him. But now Renato knew that. What would Lapino do if he knew that Lapino was going to betray him? Well, he'd concoct some crazy scheme, wouldn't he? That used Lapino's betrayal against him and it would blow up his face. Maybe he was overthinking it. Well, that would be a first. Dirty and bloody, Renato finally reached Lapino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Renato recognized the cards. It was Lapino.
We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows, and that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who happened to also be a deadly sorcerer, and, oh, his only daughter? That would be worth it. And it would be nice to see her. He'd always had a soft spot for her. And he felt sure she had one for him. On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, it's beautiful here, thought Renato. It was nice to be back with his old war buddy. All right, Lapino was a traitor. But still, he was good company. There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time. If only we had a portal onto the Emperor's ship, this would be a short war. Renato felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, a new bird. He didn't catch a raven. Renato smelled sick animals and time. No healthy ones. Getting a bad feeling about this. Renato thought. Maybe Lapino was right. Maybe they should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of coming here. As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy. Like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides.
Tell you what, said Lapino. I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial outpost.
The Imperial outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato. But what if Lapino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to the scientists himself. Lapino As Renato watched Lapino vanish on the horizon, he could feel nausea building in him. He felt ill. Could his knees really be aching this much? But how could he have handed the core off to Lapino? That was a recipe for disaster. Renato felt worse. All his joints were aching now. He'd been through beatings that felt better than this.
So the core had a kind of poison that could harm you without even touching you. That's new. Well, it had power. The rebellion needed something with power. And how was this any worse than a sword wound? Well, a death by sword was sudden and fair. This was just squalid. A piecemeal death, like old age. The observatory was a burning hulk. Dead scientists everywhere. Renato found the mad rabbit, coward. Renato wasn't sure he believed that. But Lepido was talking so fast. He always seemed to make sense. The secret rebel base. Yes. They had engineers there. But wait. Calaveras, the sage in the mountains. Maybe he would know what to do with the naked core. The base of the mountain was the only safe place for a landing. He would have to continue on foot, muscles aching. Calaveras was a scholar, not a doctor. Could he really save Renato from the poison radiating from the lost god's eye he was so recklessly carrying? Where was the cake? He'd been promised cake. The base of the mountain was the only safe place for a landing. He would have to continue on foot, muscles aching. Calaveras was a scholar, not a doctor. Could he really save Renato from the poison radiating from the lost god's eye he was so recklessly carrying? I should go, he thought.
not a fun way to die. Even if he survived, no one would write ballads about the fox whose knees ached forever, would they? Not unless he paid for it. He hated paying for publicity. There was always noise up ahead. Insects, birds, the croak and flutter of ravens arranging ambushes. But close by, there was only the breeze and the trickle of melting snow, as if every living thing was holding its breath, its poisonous burden to move on.
Time was running out for the rebellion. They might already be fighting the Imperial fleet. Everything hinged on Calaveras' ability to turn an exiled god's eye into something deadly.
The core! Splendid! Croaked Calaveras. Where's the armature?
Right, I was kind of hoping you wouldn't need it.
No, I don't. It's just a professional interest. We've got much better prismatics than the old TE ever did.
So Calaveras was an arcane engineer. He fussed at the core all day. He wrapped it with silver chains, and in front of it, he placed a huge, round ruby, so that it looked like a monstrous, floating eye. So, what is it?
Yeah, I call it the Oculum. It's my very first death ray.
And it won't poison me?
Oh, no, it's completely safe now.
Anything I should watch out for?
Yeah, try to avoid pointing at any mirrors.
As he loaded the Oculum onto the Farfarer, Bernardo was a little concerned about Calaveras. People who were utterly sure of themselves, he had found, were either experts or horribly wrong. Or both. But Bernardo only needed to fire the Oculum once. He only needed to destroy one ship, the Emperor's ship, and the war was over. Bernardo plunged into the Imperial fleet. He felt the Oculum humming. He no longer felt sick. This was going to be fun. Or at least, it was going to be over. Bernardo resisted the temptation to fire the Oculum until the time came. He could sense its arcane energies yearning to escape the sage's wrappings. But it wasn't eating him alive. So that was a plus. He felt good about himself. He'd saved a friend, he'd helped the rebels, he'd relied on himself, but he'd listened to others. He felt like the right sort of hero. Wise, yet decisive. Calaveras had been so sure it would work. Maybe he could fire it just a few times. No harm in that, right? But only when he absolutely needed to.
Renado's arm was getting tired. The core was no longer eating at him, but he still felt weak. His stamina was shot. But he had the oculum. When the ravens swarmed him, it would sometimes fire its death ray. It seemed to be warming up too, firing more and more often. Maybe he should let it cool off. He decided to stop using it entirely. Odd. The oculum was still hot to the touch. He almost thought it was getting even hotter. Well, that was ridiculous, of course. Anyway, he'd only to fire it one more time, and then he could chuck the whole contraption into the abyss. And the Emperor's ship was now in range. Renado squinted. He could make out the line of ravens protecting the ship. Zenobia in front, conjuring. And on the deck, yes, that was His Imperial Majesty, pacing in his golden armor. Renado lined up his shot and fired. Caught in the beam, the ship burst into flames. The ravens and Zenobia exploded. The Emperor, too, exploded. Renado waited for the beam to stop, but it only got brighter, and the oculum hotter. Frantic, Renado pulled the oculum towards the abyss. The ruby burst into flames. The shiny metal casing glowed, then melted. That was good. Now the core could cool off, right? Renado ran. The blast incinerated him instantly, along with both fleets. The shockwave could be felt across all Erda. That winter, with neither Empire nor rebels to rule them, the islands slid into banditry. And so began the Second Age of Darkness. The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renado knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong. But he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis Stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Renado had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion, and he had a gut feeling that he needed to use that to his advantage. Renado finally realized that Lapino was a traitor to the cause, and
Maybe Renato could use that somehow.
Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen the winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait. People were frightened these days. Just 2 weeks past, Renato had sneaked through an empty town and listened to the ravens caw about the Emperor's new taste in ritual sacrifice.
Lapino would betray him. But now Renato knew that. What would Lapino do if he knew that Lapino wanted to betray him? Well, he'd concoct some crazy scheme, wouldn't he? That used Lapino's betrayal against him and it would blow up in his face. Maybe he was overthinking this. Well, that would be a first.
Dirty and bloody, Renato finally reached Lapino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Renato recognized.
We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows, and that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who happened to also be a deadly sorcerer, and, oh, his only daughter? That would be worth it. And it would be nice to see her. He'd always had a soft spot for her. And he felt sure she had one for him.
On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, the Transcendent Emperor.
It's beautiful here, thought Renato. It was nice to be back with his old war buddy. All right, Lapino was a traitor. But still, he was good company.
There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time.
Renato hoped that the other end of this portal wasn't suspended over the abyss. Renato felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, a few birds, if you didn't count the ravens. Renato smelled sick animals and dying ones, but no healthy ones. I'm getting a bad feeling about this. Renato thought, maybe Lapina was right. Maybe he should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of punishing her. As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy, like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides.
It wasn't healthy to be so... Tell you what, said Lapino. I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial Outpost. The Imperial Outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato.
But what if Lapino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to the scientists himself.
Trust me, Renato? As Lapino vanished into the wilds of the Nexus, Renato vaguely remembered Lapino had a baby daughter, didn't he? And he told her mother he was going out to get some Easter eggs, and he'd never come back. But Renato was relieved not to carry the core anymore. He was already feeling better. And who knows, maybe this time Lapino would get it right. And if Renato could take the outpost, he'd have access to all the Empire's communications in the sector. Right?
Personal space?
Renato caught his breath. His joints still hurt, but he couldn't feel the poison in his system anymore. He'd let the armature slip out of his hands to save his friend Lapino. Of course he had to let Lapino take the core. The rebellion needed every man doing his duty. And the rabbit would be no good taking on an Imperial outpost, right? Renato took the outpost with a song in his heart. Soon, he was stuffing his sack with key messages from and to the fleet. Then the far speaker told the observatory had been sacked by ravens. Lapino and all the scientists had been taken to the mountains. Why? Why had he trusted Lapino again? And now the Empire had the core. Renato hailed the rebel base to warn them. But their far speaker didn't crouch back. Was the base under attack too? There were Imperials everywhere in the ruins, and dead civilians. The ravens were killing everything in sight. Renato was relieved to see no rebels among the dead. Maybe the secret base was still secret, but there were huge burn marks on buildings. Monstrous weapon was the Empire using here? The core had great power. Had they harnessed it somehow, even though they didn't have the armature? Even if Renato could rescue the secret base, then what? Without the Sky River, they'd still lose the final battle. One of these days, I'm really going to have to start thinking things through. He could smell charred flesh and hear screams. The ruins were on fire. The ravens had rigged up the core as some kind of burning ray. They wouldn't need to know the secret location. They were burning everything. It was killing them too. Their black feathers littered the ground. He would have to take the core from them. It was the last thing he wanted to do. The rebel base seemed quiet. That was good. Also, it seemed to be burning. That wasn't so good. As the last raven fell, Renato felt worse than he ever had. The core was killing him, again. The council members cautiously came out into the smoke.
You saved us,
croaked the speaker. They would put the weaponized core deep in a cavern, she promised, where its poison could harm no one. They would heal him if they could, she said. No, he's a weapon now. We need one. I'll lead the charge.
It will kill you,
croaked the speaker. I guess it already has, Renato said. She bobbed her head gravely.
When all this is over,
she said,
we'll name our new capital city for you.
He flew towards the Imperial fleet, a myriad ships in disciplined formation, waiting for the signal to destroy the rebellion forever. Behind him, the rebels were charging. If he failed, they would die, and so the final battle began.
Everything hurt. It was unpleasant to fight this way. With each blow he struck with his sword, he felt weaker.
Yet each time the core fired, it got brighter, as if the heat from the burning ravens and buildings only fed its hunger.
He wondered where Lupino was. Wasn't he supposed to be in the battle? No. He'd been captured, hadn't he? Oh, Renato's mind was smoky now, like the burning fleet. He hoped this wouldn't take long.
What are you guys dressed up as for Halloween? Just wondering.
If they were going to name a capital city after him, well, he just wished he had a better name. Where was Lupino? He missed Lupino's bitter outbursts. Or did he? Lupino had gotten him into this mess, hadn't he? The weapon had swept fire across the fleet. Ravens exploded in its gaze, and with every heartbeat it grew lighter. He would die. But he would die every inch a hero. Spectacularly, changing history like the legendary heroes of lore. Or was it yore? He couldn't remember anymore. Renato fell to his knees. The Emperor's bodyguards were lined up before his ship. Fierce ravens, all. And Zenobia. She was conjuring. He could not take another step. All he could do was fire the core. The ravens, Zenobia, the ship, all burst into flames, disintegrated, and blew away. So they had one, after all. The core grew brighter. He shielded his eyes, but he could still see it through his sleeves and through the flesh of his arm. And then he felt heat, as the fire grew to consume both fleets. And then he felt nothing.